The command ship Valkyr shuddered as another human missile found its mark. Commander Kavara Nexthal steadied herself against the navigation console, golden eyes narrowing as emergency lights bathed the bridge in crimson. "Engines critical. Hull breach on decks 3 through 7, reported her second, voice steady despite the chaos. Kavara assessed their situation with cold efficiency. The ambush had been perfect, human ingenuity compensating for their technological inferiority. The thought galled her. "All personnel to escape vessels," she ordered, voice carrying the authority of 15 stellar cycles in the Mirian elite forces. "Tactical data cores must be purged." She remained until the last of her crew had evacuated, then programmed her personal pod for the nearest uninhabited sector. The humans would search for survivors, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of capturing a Mirian commander. The escape sequence initiated as the Valkyr's reactor reached critical mass. Her pod ejected moments before the magnificent warship disappeared in a blinding flash that temporarily disrupted her navigation systems. She felt a soldier's remorse for the lost vessel, but no fear for herself. Death in service was the highest honor. When the secondary explosion hit her pod, sending it tumbling toward the nearby colony world, Kavara accepted her fate. The entry angle was too steep, the damage too severe. She would die, but not in human captivity. The landing, if one could call a controlled crash a landing, shattered her left exoskeletal ridge and drove a metal shard deep into her side. Purple blood, luminescent in the pod's failing lights, leaked between her armored fingers as she assessed the damage. The wound would be fatal without treatment. Perfect. Kavara dragged herself from the wreckage, silver-scaled skin reflecting the planet's harsh sunlight. Her species had evolved as apex predators on a world with 3 suns. This dim light was almost comfortable. Almost. She managed to crawl 30 meters before collapsing beneath an outcropping of rock. Her communicator was damaged beyond repair, her distress beacon compromised. No rescue would come. She arranged herself in the dignified position of a fallen warrior, back straight despite the pain, ceremonial blade clasped in her right hand. Hours passed. The sun set. Kavara's breathing grew labored as infection set in. Mirian biology was resilient, but even her enhanced healing couldn't compensate for significant blood loss and penetrating trauma without medical intervention. She was drifting between consciousness and the warrior's final dream when she heard it, footsteps. Human footsteps. "Hello, anyone there?" a male voice called out. Kavara's hand tightened on her blade. One final kill before the darkness claimed her. The human appeared, tall, with dark hair and concerned eyes. Dr. Aiden Wright had been collecting specimens when he noticed the atmospheric disturbance and smoke trail. He'd expected to find wreckage, not a wounded Mirian commander. "You're injured," he said, approaching slowly, hands visible. "I'm a doctor, I can help." "Stay back," Kavara snarled, raising her blade despite the agony the movement caused. "I need no human assistance." "You'll die without it," he replied simply. "Then I die with honor." Aiden knelt just beyond her reach. Is dying here really honorable, alone on an enemy planet without even a proper battle? Kavara hesitated, blood loss making her thoughts sluggish. The human was unarmed, wearing no military insignia, just a medic, not a soldier. "Why would you save an enemy?" she managed. "I don't see an enemy," Aiden replied. "I see someone who needs help." Consciousness faded as her blade clattered to the ground. Her last sensation was unexpected, gentle hands lifting her broken body, not the execution she'd been trained to expect. Consciousness returned to Kavara in painful fragments. First came the sterile smell, then unfamiliar sounds, mechanical beeping, air circulating through vents, the soft footsteps of someone moving nearby. Her warrior's instincts screamed danger before her eyes even opened. When she finally forced her heavy eyelids apart, the brightness of the room made her flinch. Her quarters aboard the Valkyr had been kept at Mirian standard, dim red lighting to mimic their homeworld's perpetual dusk. This harsh illumination could only mean one thing: human territory. Kavara attempted to rise, only to discover restraints across her torso and limbs. Panic flared briefly before military discipline reasserted itself. She assessed her situation methodically. Medical equipment surrounded her, monitoring her vital signs. The shrapnel had been removed from her side, the wound sealed with some primitive human method. Her exoskeletal ridge had been set and supported with a rigid brace. She was alive and a prisoner. "I wouldn't try moving yet," came a voice from the doorway. The human doctor entered, carrying a data pad. "Your physiology is remarkable, but even you need time to heal." "Remove these restraints," Kavara demanded, her universal translator converting her sibilant Mirian speech into human standard. "Or kill me now. I will not be studied like some specimen." Dr. Aiden Wright sighed, setting down his data pad. "The restraints are for your safety, not mine. You tried to attack my assistant during treatment, twice." Fuzzy memories of waking during the procedure surfaced, lashing out at unfamiliar faces, the instinctive reaction of a wounded predator. "The restraints stay until I'm confident you won't reopen your wounds," Aiden continued, checking the monitors. "But you're not a prisoner, Commander." "Then what am I?" "A patient." Kavara hissed in disbelief. "Have you reported my presence to your military authorities?" "No." That single word disrupted everything Kavara thought she knew about humans. According to Mirian intelligence, humans were opportunistic, deceitful creatures who used claims of compassion to mask their true nature as conquerors. "Why not?" she demanded. Aiden adjusted something on her IV line. "This is a civilian research outpost. We study the indigenous flora for pharmaceutical applications. The nearest military installation is 3 days' journey from here." "That doesn't answer my question." He met her golden eyes directly. "I took an oath to heal, not to harm. Your people may not recognize medical neutrality, but humans still do, even in wartime." The doctor's words stung like an accusation. Mirian forces had targeted human medical facilities, considering them strategic assets. It was logical warfare, not cruelty. At least, that's what she'd been taught. Over the next few days, Kavara tested her captivity. She refused medication, rejected food, and remained silent during Aiden's examinations. When he finally removed the restraints, she immediately attempted escape, only to collapse 10 steps from her bed, her body betraying her warrior's will. Instead of punishment, she received only Aiden's patient assistance back to bed. "Your internal organs are still healing," he explained, checking the reopened wound on her side. "Your biology is efficient but not miraculous." "You know nothing of Mirian physiology," she snapped. "I've been learning." He gestured to a scattered collection of xenobiology texts. "Your cardiovascular system is fascinating, triple-chambered heart copper-based blood. It's why your blood appears purple rather than red." Despite herself, Kavara was impressed by his diligence. "You studied me while I was unconscious." "I had to save your life." Aiden's hands were cool against her fever-hot skin as he replaced the dressing. "The fever isn't responding to standard antibiotics. Your immune system works differently from ours." That night, the infection overwhelmed her weakened defenses. Kavara burned with fever, drifting between hallucinations of battle and fragments of Mirian death prayers. Through it all, she remained aware of the human doctor's constant presence, his hands cooling her skin, his voice a steady anchor in her delirium. When clarity finally returned, she found Aiden slumped in a chair beside her bed, exhausted from his 3-day vigil. Medical supplies littered the room, evidence of his desperate effort to save an enemy combatant who had given him nothing but hostility. For the first time since her crash landing, Commander Kavara Nexthal questioned whether everything she'd been taught about humans might be wrong. 2 standard weeks after her crash landing, Kavara stood at the window of her recovery room, watching the alien sunrise paint Nexus 7's landscape in shades of gold and amber. Her silver-scaled body had begun healing at an accelerated rate now that the infection had been conquered, though she still felt weaker than she would admit. The door slid open behind her. She didn't turn, recognizing Aiden's footsteps by now, lighter than other humans, deliberately measured as though he was always careful not to startle her. "Your readings are improving," he said, setting down a tray with her morning meal, a mixture of protein compounds he'd formulated to match Mirian nutritional needs. "How's the pain today?" "Manageable," Kavara replied, her voice deliberately neutral. She had maintained a careful distance since her fever broke, unsettled by how vulnerable she'd been. A Mirian commander should never show weakness, yet this human had seen her at her most defenseless and still treated her with dignity. "I thought you might want this back." Aiden held out her ceremonial blade, the one she'd dropped when he found her. It had been cleaned, the intricate etchings on its surface restored. Kivara's eyes widened in surprise. You're giving me a weapon. It's important to you. I can see the craftsmanship. It tells a story, doesn't it? She accepted the blade, fingers tracing the familiar patterns. Each marking represents a campaign, a victory, a pause, or a loss worth remembering. This exchange marked a shift between them. Over the following days, Kivara began asking questions about the outpost, about Aiden's work. He explained his research into native plants with healing properties, occasionally sharing stories of his past, his training as a combat medic, the horrors he'd witnessed on frontal medical stations before requesting transfer to this remote posting. "You fled the war," she observed one evening as they shared a meal in the common area, her tone not accusatory but curious. "I chose a different way to fight," he corrected gently, "by healing rather than harming." Something in his words resonated with a doubt that had been growing in her since her arrival. Mirian society valued strength above all, equating compassion with weakness. Yet this human's compassion had saved her life, an act requiring both strength and skill. On the 18th day, alarms shattered their tentative peace. Aiden rushed to the security console, his expression grim. "Raiders, scavengers who target remote outposts, they must have detected your pod's energy signature." Kivara watched the security feed, counting 6 armed figures approaching the main entrance. "Your security measures." "Minimal, we're researchers, not soldiers." The first explosion rocked the facility, damaging the east wing. Without hesitation, Kivara retrieved her blade. "You saved my life. I will not stand by while yours is threatened." Despite Aiden's protests, she positioned herself near the entrance. When the raiders breached the door, they found not a vulnerable research team, but a Mirian warrior, still weakened but driven by a new purpose. The first 2 fell before they registered her presence. The third managed a wild shot that grazed her shoulder before her blade found his throat. The remaining raiders retreated, but not before Aiden took a hit intended for her. Kivara dispatched the attacker with cold efficiency, then turned to find the doctor clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. For the first time in her military career, Kivara felt fear for someone other than herself or her unit. She carried him to the medical bay, following his pained instructions to stop the bleeding. "Pressure there," he gasped, "the blue solution in the cabinet." Her hands, designed for warfare, now worked to save rather than destroy. When Aiden finally stabilized, exhaustion overcame her. She slumped beside his treatment bed, her silver-scaled hand still holding the compress to his wound. Hours later, she woke to find Aiden watching her, his eyes reflecting something she'd never encountered, not pity or fear, but a recognition that transcended their species' differences. "You protected me," he said simply. "You would have done the same." Her voice emerged rougher than intended. His hand found hers, warm human skin against cool Mirian scales. The contact sent an unexpected current through her body, a sensation both alarming and exhilarating. "Among my people," she said slowly, "touching another's hands is intimate." Aiden began to withdraw, but she held him fast. "I didn't say stop." Their eyes locked, acknowledging the barrier they were crossing, enemy lines redefined into something neither of them had words for yet. When his fingers intertwined with hers, Kivara felt territories within herself being charted that no battle plan had prepared her to defend. Morning light filtered through the habitat dome's reinforced panels, casting dappled patterns across the floor of Aiden's quarters. Kivara traced them with her gaze, counting the seconds until she would need to return to her own room before the other researchers arrived for the day shift. These stolen hours had become precious, dangerous, and addictive. Beside her, Aiden slept, his breathing deep and even. She studied his face, still marveling at the stark differences between them. His skin, so vulnerable and warm compared to her silver-scaled exterior. No protective ridges, no natural armor. Humans were physically fragile, yet Aiden possessed a different kind of strength, one she was only beginning to understand. 3 cycles had passed since the raider attack. 3 cycles of healing, his wound and her perceptions. Each day brought new discoveries. The sensitivity of human skin to Mirian touch, the surprising compatibility of their bodies despite evolutionary differences, the way his breath caught when her clawed fingers gently explored the contours of his chest. Kivara slipped from the bed, retrieving her garments with silent efficiency. Her military conditioning remained, even as other aspects of her identity shifted. She paused at a small reflective surface, noting how her expression had changed. The rigid mask of command had softened, her golden eyes less harsh. "Leaving already?" Aiden's voice was rough with sleep. "The botanist begins work in 17 minutes, she replied, fastening the modified clothing he had provided. Discovery would complicate matters. He sat up, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his healing side. "For you or for me?" "For both." Kivara returned to the bed, allowing herself one more moment of proximity. "Your colleagues would not understand. Some might surprise you." His fingers brushed the sensitive scales at her neck, sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. "Humans are adaptable. Mirians are not." The admission cost her something. "Fraternization with enemy species is punishable by exile, physical intimacy." She hesitated. "Death would be considered merciful." Aiden's expression darkened. Then why risk it? Kivara had asked herself the same question repeatedly. She was a decorated commander, loyal to the Mirian hegemony. Yet here she was, committing treason with every touch, every shared breath. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Perhaps near-death has altered my neural pathways." He laughed, a sound she had grown to crave. "That's the most clinical description of falling for someone I've ever heard." Falling, an apt term for this uncontrolled descent from everything she had believed about herself. Before she could respond, an alert chimed from the central communication system. Aiden frowned, checking the screen. "Signal detected in high orbit, Mirian communication frequency." Ice formed in Kivara's veins. A scout vessel, they're scanning for survivors. The implications hung between them, unspoken but overwhelming. Recovery meant return to duty, to the war, to opposite sides of a conflict that had claimed millions of lives. "They can't detect you here," Aiden said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "The facility's shielding was damaged in the raider attack." Kivara moved to the window, staring at the sky as though she could see the vessel. "It's only a matter of time." That evening, as the research team discussed reinforcing their defenses, Kivara retreated to the observatory deck. The stars looked different from this planet, arranged in unfamiliar patterns, yet governed by the same universal constants. Like her and Aiden, fundamentally different, yet responding to the same primal forces. He found her there hours later, bringing the translation manual they had been working on together. She had been teaching him Mirian language, finding unexpected pleasure in hearing her native tongue shaped by his lips. "If they find you," he said without preamble, "what will you do?" Kivara had been a tactical commander for 15 cycles. She had never hesitated over difficult decisions, never questioned her duty. Until now. "I don't know," she answered honestly. He stepped closer, the manual forgotten. "Would you tell them about us, about what you've learned here?" "That humans are not what we believed." Her laugh held no humor. "They would say I was compromised, brainwashed. No one would believe me." "Try me." Aiden's intensity surprised her. "What have you learned?" Kivara met his gaze directly. "That strength exists in many forms, that mercy isn't weakness, that there are battles worth losing." His kiss was urgent, almost desperate. She responded with equal fervor, clawed hands gentle against his fragile skin even as desire sharpened her senses. Their bodies found each other with growing familiarity. Human warmth against Mirian coolness, soft skin against protective scales, each discovering unexpected pleasure in their differences. Later, nestled against him in the observatory's viewing platform, Kivara faced the truth she had been avoiding. "If they call, I must answer. A commander cannot abandon her duty." Aiden's arms tightened around her. "Even if that duty is based on lies." "Especially then," she whispered. "But I will return, this I swear by the 3 moons of Miria." The sacred oath hung between them as distant stars witnessed their forbidden union, a fragile promise against the vast, uncaring expanse of a war-torn galaxy. The Mirian scout ship Venator descended through Nexus 7's atmosphere with predatory grace, landing thrusters carving temporary patterns in the dust half a kilometer from the research outpost. Commander Kivara stood at the facility's edge, her military posture reinstated, battle armor retrieved from her crashed pod and polished to regulation standard. Behind her, positioned just inside the doorway, Aiden waited. Their goodbye had been brief, neither believing in false promises nor dramatic declarations. What existed between them transcended both. Whatever happens, he had whispered against her skin in their final moments alone, know that you've changed how I see the universe. And you have rewritten mine, she had replied, allowing herself one last lingering touch. Now she stood alone as the scout ship's hatch opened, revealing 3 armored Mirian soldiers. She recognized the lead officer immediately, Subcommander Dravex, her former second-in-command and oldest battle companion. "Commander Nexthal," he called, genuine relief evident in his voice. "We detected your life signs but feared human intervention." Kivara clasped her arm across her chest in formal salute. "The Valkyr. Destroyed with all hands except those who escaped in pods. You were the last life sign we located." Dravex approached, his posture shifting subtly as he noted the healed wounds visible beneath her armor. "You were injured." "Critically," she confirmed. "My pod crashed. I would have died but for medical intervention." Dravex's eyes narrowed, scanning the research facility behind her. "Humans treated you? Were you their prisoner?" The question demanded a simple answer, yet represented everything Kivara had wrestled with these past cycles. 5 weeks ago, she would have considered herself a captive regardless of her treatment. Now, "I was their patient," she said carefully, "and later their guest." Confusion crossed Dravex's features. "Command will want a full debriefing. We must determine what information was compromised during your convalescence." "Nothing was compromised," Kivara stated firmly. "Dr. Wright treated my wounds without demanding military intelligence." "A human doctor," Dravex's tone held disbelief. "Commander, with respect, you may have been subjected to coercive techniques without realizing." "I was not," Kivara's voice hardened. "Subcommander, how many human medical facilities has our fleet targeted this past standard year?" The unexpected question made him hesitate. 17 major centers as authorized by High Command. They were supporting enemy combatants. "As this doctor supported me, an enemy combatant." Kivara let the implication hang in the air. "Yet you expect his destruction while celebrating my survival." Dravex lowered his voice. "Commander, these words border on sedition, the war effort." "The war is based on false premises," Kivara interrupted, aware she was crossing a line that could never be redrawn. "Humans are not what we were taught." "You've been compromised." Dravex's hand moved toward his weapon. "I must insist you return with us for psychological evaluation." Kivara stepped forward, her right hand making the ancient gesture of challenge. "By the high code of Myria, I invoke the warrior's right of truth speak. Will you hear me, battle brother?" The formal invocation startled him. The warrior's right was rarely used, a sacred tradition predating the hegemony itself. To refuse it would dishonor his own standing. "I will hear you," he acknowledged reluctantly. Kivara squared her shoulders. "I have spent 43 cycles in service to the hegemony. My blood has watered 17 worlds. My loyalty has never wavered." She gestured toward the facility. "This human saved my life without condition. He protected me from his own military. He showed me compassion where our own doctrine would have demanded my abandonment as a burden." "One exception doesn't invalidate strategic necessity," Dravex argued. "Then explain this. While I recovered, I studied their communications, their research. They seek cures, Dravex, treatments for diseases that affect both our peoples. The botanical compounds they've isolated could save Myrian lives." She could see doubt flickering in his eyes, the first crack in absolute conviction. It was enough. "I will not return to command," she stated firmly. "By the warrior's right, I claim exemption from further service. My blood debt is to this place now." "The High Command will never accept." "They will when you deliver my research data." Kivara handed him a data crystal. "Preliminary analysis of medical applications that could benefit our wounded. A peace offering, not a surrender." For long moments, the future balanced on the edge of Dravex's decision. Finally, he stepped back. "I cannot condone your choice, Commander, but I will honor the warrior's right." His voice lowered. "Your name will become a whisper in the ranks, either traitor or visionary. I don't yet know which." "Perhaps both," Kivara responded, feeling an unexpected lightness. "Tell them I died with honor if that serves the greater peace." After the scout ship departed, Kivara remained watching the sky until Aiden's footsteps approached from behind. His hand found hers, no longer an alien touch, but the most familiar sensation in her universe. "They're gone," she said simply. For now, he added, scientific pragmatism tempering hope. Kivara turned to face him, seeing their improbable future reflected in his eyes. The war will continue, but not here, not for us. As Nexus 7's sun set behind the research facility, Commander Kivara Nexthal, now simply Kivara, made a different kind of oath than any in her military career. Not to an empire or ideology, but to the radical notion that understanding could be stronger than hatred, that healing could matter more than conquest. And as Aiden's arms encircled her, bringing their different worlds together in perfect alignment, she recognized the most important tactical truth she had ever learned. Sometimes victory meant surrendering to the one battle you never expected to fight, the one for your own heart.